The spreadsheet was still open on my laptop at 4:47 a.m. when I made the decision that would either save my family or end my marriage. 14 data points. That's all it took. 14 quiet, individually dismissible data points that, arranged on a timeline, formed a shape I recognized from every catastrophic failure case study I'd ever built a model around. An exponential curve hiding inside noise. My name is Aaron Caldwell. I'm 41. I worked as a municipal risk analyst for Maricopa County, Arizona. My job, for the better part of 9 years, was to build predictive models for infrastructure failure. Water main breaks, grid overloads, hospital surge capacity. I spent my career staring at data nobody wanted to look at, building forecasts nobody wanted to fund, and writing reports that ended up in filing cabinets 2 hours after the board meeting concluded. I was the man who told comfortable people uncomfortable things, and I was used to being ignored. But this wasn't a water main. It started 4 days earlier, on a Tuesday. My department receives automatic feeds from County Health Services hospital admissions, ambulance dispatch logs, coroner intake volumes. It's background data. Most weeks, it's wallpaper. That Tuesday, I noticed a 7% spike in emergency room visits coded as animal bite unspecified. Not dog bites, not rattlesnake envenomation, unspecified. 7% over a rolling 3-day average doesn't trigger any alert. It's within normal variance. I flagged it in my personal tracker because unspecified coding usually means intake staff were too overwhelmed or too confused to classify. And either reason interested me. Wednesday, the spike held. Thursday, it doubled. By Friday, it had tripled against the original baseline, and 2 new codes appeared in the feed that I'd never seen in 9 years. Bite human, unknown assailant, and behavioral disturbance, acute unresponsive aggression. 11 cases. Then 19. Then the Friday night batch came in at 43, and the number of discharges was 0. Not low. 0. Nobody who checked in with those codes was checking out. I pulled the livestock reports next, because that's what my training told me to do. When human health anomalies clustered without explanation, look at the animal data. The Arizona Department of Agriculture publishes a weekly summary of livestock disposal volumes by county. 3 rendering plants serve the Phoenix Metro corridor. Their combined throughput had increased by 40% over 2 weeks. No declared disease outbreak. No USDA advisory. Just quiet, accelerated disposal of animal carcasses with no paperwork trail I could find. Then the water. Maricopa County draws from a mix of Salt River Project surface water and groundwater wells. I have access to the daily treatment chemical usage reports because my models need them for contamination risk forecasts. Chloramine dosing at the Deer Valley treatment plant had been manually increased 3 times in 8 days. That only happens when source water shows unexpected biological load. There was no public notice. No boil water advisory, just quiet, incremental increases that someone authorized without generating a formal incident report. 14 data points, animal bites reclassified. Human bites uncategorized. Behavioral disturbances with 0 discharge rates. Livestock disposal surges with no declared cause. Water treatment adjustments with no public disclosure. Each one was a whisper. Together, they were a scream that nobody was in the room to hear. I sat in my home office at 4:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and I could feel the arithmetic settling into my chest like concrete. I didn't know the word for what was coming. I didn't have a name for it yet. But the model was clear. Whatever was generating these numbers was doubling every 31 hours. And the institutions that should have been responding were instead quietly adjusting their systems and hoping the curve would flatten on its own. I'd seen that institutional behavior before. It's what agencies do when the truth is too expensive to admit. I closed the laptop. I walked down the hallway. I opened the bedroom door where my wife, Lena, was sleeping. And I said the sentence that would make my daughter refuse to speak to me. My son cry in the back seat for 2 hours, and my wife look at me with an expression I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. We need to leave Phoenix, today, before noon. And I need you to trust me without a complete explanation. She opened her eyes, looked at me, and I watched the last 6 months of our already strained marriage land on her face like a verdict. "Aaron," she said, "it's 5 in the morning. I know what time it is." Some context, Lena and I had been married for 17 years. Good years, most of them. 2 kids, our daughter Margot, 15 and surgically precise in her ability to identify adult hypocrisy, and our son Theo, 9, a boy made almost entirely of trust and routine. We lived in a 4-bedroom in Glendale, 10 minutes from my office, 12 minutes from Lena's veterinary clinic. A normal life, a good enough life. But the last year had been hard in a specific way that matters. 14 months before that Saturday morning, I'd had what Lena carefully referred to as an episode. I'd become convinced, based on my own modeling, that a cluster of small earthquakes near the Palo Verde nuclear generating station indicated a seismic escalation that could compromise the cooling systems. I'd built a 40-page report. I'd called my supervisor at 11 at night. I'd pulled the kids out of school for 2 days and driven the family to Flagstaff, where we sat in a Holiday Inn while nothing happened. The earthquake stopped. Palo Verde issued no alerts. My supervisor suggested I talk to someone. Lena suggested the same thing, less gently. I did talk to someone. A therapist named Dr. Keene, who was patient and competent, and who helped me understand that my pattern recognition instincts, the very thing that made me good at my job, could, under stress, begin manufacturing conclusions that the data didn't support. Confirmation bias wearing the mask of rigor. I'd been anxious about the plant for years, and when the tremors appeared, I'd built a model around a fear rather than a data set. I accepted this. I worked on it. I took a low-dose SSR wine for 4 months and came off it cleanly. But the scar tissue remained. In our household, I was now the man who had cried wolf with a spreadsheet. Lena had forgiven me, technically. Margot had not, practically. And I had promised explicitly, in Dr. Keene's office, with Lena sitting beside me, that I would never again uproot the family based on a private analysis without first consulting external verification. That promise was 15 months old when I walked into the bedroom at 4:47 a.m. and broke it. "Aaron." Lena sat up. Her voice had that particular calm she used when she was managing me. Not unkind, clinical. "What's happening?" "I found something in the county data feeds. Health anomalies. Hospital admissions that don't make sense. Livestock disposal rates that don't have a declared cause. I've been tracking it for 4 days. I think something is spreading, and I think the agencies are suppressing early reporting." She stared at me. I watched her cycle through the options. He's relapsing. He's sleep-deprived. He's built another fear model. I could see each option arrive and settle. "Have you talked to anyone at work about this?" "No." "Have you sent it to the health department?" "They generated the data, Lena. They already know." "Then why aren't they telling anyone?" "Because the curve is 4 days old, and the doubling rate is 31 hours, and they're still in the phase where they think they can manage it quietly. By the time they can't, it'll be too late to move." She closed her eyes. "Aaron, you promised." I know what I promised. You promised you wouldn't do this. I know. So what's different? The answer to that question was everything. And I didn't know how to compress it into a sentence that wouldn't sound exactly like the last time. The last time, I'd been afraid, and I'd built a model around fear. This time, I'd found the data first and the fear followed. The directionality was reversed. But from the outside, from her side of the bed, the picture was identical. Husband, pre-dawn, wild eyes. We need to leave. Lena, I'm asking for 12 hours. We drive north. Flagstaff, Prescott, anywhere higher and less dense. If I'm wrong, we come home tomorrow, and I'll call Dr. Keene on Monday, and I'll accept whatever that means for us. But if I'm right, and we're still here at noon... You're scaring me, she said. And I couldn't tell if she meant the content or the behavior. I still can't. Good, I said, and I meant it. You should be scared. Pack enough for 3 days. I'll wake the kids. She didn't move. I stood in the doorway, and we looked at each other across the bedroom. And in that space between us, I could feel the entire architecture of our marriage, flexing under a load it was not designed to bear. Then she pushed the covers off and stood up. Not because she believed me, because she was afraid of what would happen to me if she didn't. I took it. I took that compromise, and I moved. Waking Theo was simple. He was 9. I said, "Hey, buddy, surprise camping trip." And he was packing his backpack within 4 minutes, stuffing it with a flashlight, 2 Goosebumps novels, and a Ziploc bag of gummy bears he thought I didn't know about. Theo didn't need reasons. Theo needed proximity to his parents and a sense of adventure, and at 5 in the morning, both were available. Margot was a different species. I knocked on her door at 5:15. No answer. I opened it. She was awake, sitting up in bed with her phone screen lighting her face blue. She'd already heard us through the walls. 15-year-olds hear everything. They just choose what to acknowledge. "We're leaving for a few days," I said. "Pack a bag." "No." "Margot, Mom already texted me. She said you're having another episode." She didn't look up from her phone. Her voice was flat, informational, the way she spoke when she wanted to communicate that she'd already processed the situation and arrived at her conclusion without my input. Lena had texted her. While I was waking Theo, Lena had sent Margot a message framing my behavior as a mental health event. I absorbed this. I let it land. I did not have time to feel what it meant. "I need you in the car by 6, I said. "I have a soccer tournament at 10. "You'll miss it." Now she looked at me. Margot has my eyes brown, deep set, a little too still when she's angry. She was angry. "Dad, last time you did this, I missed homecoming. I didn't talk to you for 3 weeks. Do you remember that?" "I remember." "So, what's different this time?" The same question Lena asked. The same question I couldn't answer without sounding exactly like the person they were afraid I'd become again. I stood in her doorway, and I felt the trap close around me, the trap of having been wrong before, which is the most efficient silencer ever engineered against people who might be right now. "I'll make you a deal," I said. "If by noon nothing unusual has happened, I'll drive you back myself. I'll buy you whatever you want for dinner. I'll never do this again." "You said that last time." "I know. So why should I believe you?" I didn't have an answer that she'd accept, so I used the only currency I had left. "Because I'm your father, and I'm asking, not telling, asking." She stared at me for a long time. Then she threw her phone on the bed and stood up. "Fine. But I'm bringing my cleats, because when you're wrong, You're driving me straight to the tournament from wherever we are." "Deal." She pushed past me in the hallway. I heard her opening the linen closet, pulling out her duffel bag. Every movement she made was a statement of protest. I let her have it. Protest is fine. Protest means you're in the car. By 5:50, 4 bags were by the front door. Lena had packed silently and efficiently 3 days of clothes, toiletries, the first aid kit from under the bathroom sink. She'd also packed Theo's medication. He takes a daily antihistamine for dust allergies. The fact that she packed it told me she was planning for the full 3 days, even if she believed this would be over by afternoon. That's who Lena is. She prepares for the reality she hopes against. I loaded the Suburban. 4 bags, 2 cases of water from the garage, a cooler with everything perishable from the refrigerator, the camping bin that lived on the top shelf, sleeping bags, a cook stove, a tarp. I added the toolbox. I added the 12 gauge from the gun safe, unloaded, locked in its case, slid beneath the rear cargo cover where the kids wouldn't see it. At 6:08 a.m., I pulled out of the driveway. Theo was in the back seat reading Goosebumps. Margot had her AirPods in and her arms crossed and her body angled toward the window as far from me as geometry allowed. Lena sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap, looking straight ahead, saying nothing. I drove north on the I-17. The highway was nearly empty. Phoenix was still asleep. The city I'd lived in for 11 years slid past the windows in the soft gray light like something seen through water. And I memorized it without meaning to. The strip malls, the palm trees, the billboards for personal injury lawyers and water park season passes. Everything ordinary. Everything still standing. In the rear-view mirror, Margot caught my eye. She shook her head slowly, deliberately, making sure I saw it. I kept driving. By 8 o'clock, we were past Black Canyon City and climbing into the Prescott National Forest. I'd chosen the Prescott route over Flagstaff because Prescott was closer, less trafficked. And I knew a Forest Service campground off Senator Highway where cell coverage was thin and the access road could be blocked with a single vehicle. I hadn't told Lena any of this reasoning. I was rationing information because every piece I shared was another data point for her diagnosis of me. Theo had fallen asleep with his cheek against the window and a gummy bear melting in his open palm. Margot had cycled through 3 podcast episodes, and I could hear the thin bleed of voices through her AirPods. Something about celebrity drama, normal and remote. The sound of a world that still made sense to her. Lena spoke for the first time since Glendale. "I want to know exactly what you saw," I told her. All 14 points. The hospital codes, the bite classifications, the zero discharge anomaly, the livestock disposal, the chloramine increases. I kept my voice flat. I presented it the way I would to a review board: data, methodology, conclusion. I did not editorialize. I did not catastrophize. I gave her the numbers and let the numbers be the argument. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for almost a full minute. "Those could all be coincidence," she said. "Any one of them, yes. Even several together? Yes. But you don't think so?" "No." "What do you think it is?" This was the question I'd been circling since Thursday night. And the honest answer was the one that would collapse whatever remaining credibility I had. Because the model pointed toward a pathogen, something transmitted by bite, something that produced acute neurological aggression, something that was spreading faster than the response infrastructure could contain. And the only framework for that combination, the only word that lived at the intersection of those variables, was a word I could not say to my wife at 8 in the morning on a highway through the Arizona pines without sounding clinically delusional. I think it's a fast-moving pathogen with a neurological component, I said. I think it's been spreading for at least 10 days. I think the agencies know and they're trying to manage it below the public threshold. A pathogen that makes people bite other people. Yes, Aaron. I know how it sounds. You're describing. I know what I'm describing. I'm asking you to look at the data, not the label. She turned toward the window. I could see her reflection in the glass, and the expression on her face was the one I feared most, not anger, not dismissal, but pity. The gentle, exhausted pity of a woman who loves a man she believes is breaking down. There's a campground 12 miles ahead, I said. We'll set up there. If nothing happens by 6 tonight, 12 hours from when we left, we drive home. That's the deal. That's the deal you made with Margot. It's the deal I'm making with everyone. She nodded slowly. Then she said very quietly, I called Dr. Keene's answering service before we left. I left a message. I didn't respond. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I drove through a corridor of ponderosa pines that smelled like vanilla and clean air. And I carried the knowledge that my wife had called my therapist the way you call a specialist when a patient is deteriorating. The campground was called Lynx Lake Overflow. It was a secondary site, gravel pads and fire rings, no hookups, no host. In May, it was empty. I pulled the Suburban across the access road at an angle that would require a 3-point turn for any vehicle to pass, then backed it onto the first pad. It looked like careless parking. It was a barricade. Theo woke up energized, as if the altitude itself was a toy. He was out of the car before I'd set the parking brake, picking up pine cones, pointing at a Steller's jay in a juniper tree. Dad, is that a blue jay? Steller's jay. Same family, different bird. Cool. Can we make a fire? Later, buddy. I set up the camp with Alina's help, though her help had the quality of a person going through therapeutic motions, participating in the delusion to manage the delusional. She unrolled sleeping bags. She organized the cooler. She did not look at me when our hands were close. Margot sat on a boulder at the edge of the site with her phone raised above her head, hunting for signal. There's no service here, she announced, obviously. There's some at the top of the ridge, I said, pointing to a rise about 200 yards through the trees. I checked the coverage maps. You checked the coverage maps. She repeated it the way you repeat evidence in a prosecution. You plan to bring us somewhere with no signal. I plan to bring us somewhere remote. Same thing. She dropped her phone to her side. Dad, my friends are going to think I'm dead. Haley is she's literally going to report me missing. You can hike to the ridge and text her. I shouldn't have to hike to a ridge to text my best friend because my dad is having a breakdown. That word breakdown landed with surgical precision. It was Lena's word, recycled through the family lexicon, now wielded by a 15-year-old who understood exactly how much weight it carried. Margot wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate by her understanding. She had a father who'd done this before. The script was familiar. She was simply reading her lines. I let it go. I finished setting up the tent. I boiled water on the camp stove and made instant coffee and sat in a folding chair and opened my laptop, which still had the spreadsheet cached offline. I stared at the curve. I checked my math. I checked it again. The model hadn't changed. If the doubling rate held 31 hours, based on 4 days of data, then the case count in Maricopa County alone would cross 6,000 by midday Saturday. 6,000 cases of acute neurological aggression with 0 discharges. 6,000 people who went into hospitals and didn't come out. And if the institutions had been suppressing for even 2 days longer than I estimated, the number was closer to 20,000. At 9:30 a.m., I hiked to the ridge myself. I got 2 bars. I opened the county health feed on my phone. The page loaded slowly, white space filling in blocks. The Saturday morning batch was posted. I read the numbers, then I read them again. Then I sat down on a granite slab and pressed my phone against my forehead and breathed. The overnight admissions for behavioral disturbance acute unresponsive aggression had not doubled. They had tripled. 131 new cases since midnight. The 0 discharge rate held. And there were 2 new codes in the feed I'd never seen before. Codes that didn't exist in the standard medical classification system. Codes that someone at the county had created manually. Bite patient previously deceased. Resuscitation not attempted patient ambulatory. I read those codes 7 times. Patient previously deceased. Patient ambulatory. A dead person walking. Someone at a hospital intake desk had needed a code for that, and there wasn't one, so they'd made one, because the paperwork still mattered to someone even as the world was ending. I put my phone in my pocket. I walked back down the ridge. Lena was sitting by the fire ring with a book open on her lap that she wasn't reading. She looked up at me, and whatever she saw on my face made her close the book. "What?" she said. "It's accelerating." By 11 o'clock, the campground felt like a courtroom in recess. Lena was processing. Margot was hostile. Theo was building a fort out of deadfall branches, oblivious and happy. And I was pacing between the car and the fire ring, carrying my phone like a detonator, checking it each time I reached the ridge. At 11:15, Margot made her move. I was refilling the water filter when I heard the Suburban's door open. I turned. Margot was in the passenger seat with her duffel bag, door open, feet on the running board. "I texted Haley's mom from the ridge," she said. "She's picking me up in Prescott. I gave her the GPS pin for the Walmart on Willow Creek." "No." "Dad, I'm 15, I can..." "No, you're not leaving this campsite. You can't keep me here." She was right, in a practical sense. I couldn't physically restrain my daughter. But I could see the timeline in my head, the drive to Prescott, the handoff to Haley's mother, the drive back to Phoenix, and then whatever was doubling every 31 hours would find her in a suburban house 20 minutes from the highest density cluster zone in the state. "Margot, listen to me." I crouched beside the open car door. She was looking at her phone, refusing eye contact. "I know you think I'm wrong. I know you think this is like last time. But I need you to consider the possibility that I'm not wrong. Just the possibility. Can you hold that in your head for 6 more hours? 6 hours ago, you said 12 hours. Now it's 6 more. Next, it'll be 6 more. That's how this works with you. This is not like last time. You said that last time too." I had no answer. She was right. Every reassurance I offered was contaminated by its own history. I was a boy who'd cried wolf. And the wolf was real this time, and the sentence for having been wrong before was that no one was left to believe me when I was right. Lena appeared beside me. She'd been listening from behind the tent. "Margot, put your bag down." "Mom, you don't even believe him." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I didn't expect. "I believe he's frightened. And your father doesn't frighten easily. That's enough for me to stay until tonight." It wasn't trust. It wasn't belief. It was a concession to the man she knew underneath the pattern she feared. And Margot, who revered her mother with a ferocity she'd never grant me, slowly pulled her duffel back out of the car and dropped it on the gravel. 6 o'clock, Margot said. 6 o'clock, and we're going home. 6 o'clock, Lena confirmed. I nodded. 6 o'clock. By my model, 6 o'clock was 2 hours past the threshold where containment would fail. If I was right, by 6 o'clock, there would be nothing to go home to. At 12:40 p.m., I was boiling rice on the camp stove when Theo came out of the tree line, holding something in both hands, cupped carefully, the way he carries frogs. "Dad, there's a dog in the woods." I set the pot down. "What kind of dog?" "A brown one. It was walking funny, like its legs didn't work right. I tried to pet it, but it made a sound, and I got scared." I was already moving. "Show me where." He led me 40 yards into the pines, to a dry wash where the ground was loose, decomposed granite. I saw it before he pointed a medium-sized dog, maybe a boxer mix, standing in the center of the wash. Standing was generous. Its front legs were stiff, locked at the joints. Its head hung low, swaying. There was something wrong with its mouth. The jaw was slack, and a thick, ropey strand of saliva hung from its lower lip to the ground. Its eyes were open, but the pupils were blown so wide that both eyes looked black. "Theo, get behind me." "Is it sick?" "Yes, get behind me now." The dog's head tracked toward my voice, but the motion was delayed, mechanical, like a security camera on a slow servo. It didn't growl. It didn't bark. It took one step toward us. And the step was wrong, too rigid, the foot lifting too high and landing too hard, as if the signals between brain and muscle were arriving out of sequence. I backed up, keeping Theo behind me, and we retreated to the campsite. I told Lena what I'd seen. She's a veterinarian. She listened, and I watched her professional instincts override her personal doubts. "Blown pupils and motor dysfunction could be rabies," she said. "Could it be something else?" She didn't answer immediately. She was thinking. "The jaw presentation doesn't sound like furious rabies. Furious stage dogs are hyper-aggressive, but they're coordinated. What you're describing sounds more like a motor cortex disruption, something affecting voluntary movement at the neurological level, consistent with a pathogen that targets the central nervous system." She looked at me sharply. "Aaron, don't. I'm not making a case. I'm asking you what you see." "I see a sick dog in the woods and a husband who wants it to prove his theory." That was fair. I let it land. But I also picked up the shotgun case from under the cargo cover, unlocked it, loaded 4 shells, and leaned it against the Suburban's rear tire. Lena watched me do it. She didn't object. That silence was louder than any argument she could have made. At 1:15, I hiked back to the ridge for signal. The county health feed had updated with a noon batch that shouldn't have existed. The system publishes once daily at 6 a.m. An off-cycle update meant someone had pushed it manually. Emergency reporting. The number was 1,247 new admissions in 6 hours. The codes patient previously deceased and patient ambulatory now had their own line items. 209 entries. Below the data table, there was a text field that usually contained seasonal flu reminders or vaccination clinic schedules. Today it contained a single sentence, written in plain language that no municipal health bureaucrat would ever use unless the procedural world had already ended. Facility lockdown in effect. Do not approach any Maricopa County medical facility. This is not a drill. I screenshotted it. I walked back down the ridge. I handed my phone to Lena without a word. She read it. She read it again. Then she sat down on the cooler as though her legs had simply stopped accepting assignments. "Oh God," she said. "Yeah." "Aaron, what is this?" "It's what I told you it was." She looked up at me, and the expression on her face was no longer pity. It was the one that comes after pity. When the thing you pitied turns out to be prescience, and you realize that every comforting story you told yourself was just the anesthetic wearing off before the surgery. "How long?" she asked. "Before it reaches us?" "I don't know. Depends on how fast it moves out of urban density. If it's following population corridors, the I-17 will be the vector. Prescott is 90 minutes from Phoenix by highway. We're 12 miles from Prescott." "I know." She stood up. She walked to the tent and began repacking the sleeping bags. No discussion, no negotiation. The data had spoken in a language she understood: institutional panic, facility lockdowns, the measured prose of systems admitting they've been overwhelmed. Margot was watching from her boulder. "What's happening?" Lena looked at me. The question in her eyes was the one I'd been dreading since 4:47 a.m. Do we tell them what's coming, or do we keep them moving on a comfortable lie? I chose the middle road, which means I chose the coward's road, which means I chose the only road I could live with. "There's a health emergency in Phoenix," I told Margot. "The hospitals are locked down. We're going to move further from the city until it's resolved." "What kind of health emergency?" "An infectious disease outbreak. We don't have full details." "Is it like COVID?" "No, it's not like COVID." She studied me. Margot has an internal polygraph that's more accurate than anything the FBI uses. She knew I was editing. She could feel the shape of what I was leaving out, the way you can feel the outline of a submerged object by the way the water moves around it. "You're leaving something out," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't have enough confirmed information to tell you more without scaring you in ways that aren't useful yet." She considered this. Then she did something that recalibrated everything I thought I knew about my daughter. She nodded. "Okay. Tell me when you do." And she started packing her bag. Not compliance, not submission. A tactical decision by a person who understood that incomplete information from a credible source was more useful than complete information from a compromised one. She'd decided, in that moment, that I was credible, that my data had been validated by her mother's reaction, that the smart move was to conserve her objections and deploy them when they'd actually matter. I'd spent a year believing my daughter had lost respect for me. What she'd actually done was put her respect in escrow, waiting for evidence that would justify its release. We broke camp in 9 minutes, everything into the Suburban. I pulled off the access road and headed north on Senator Highway, deeper into the forest, further from Prescott, further from the I-17 corridor. The road was unpaved, one lane, winding through dense pine forest at 6,000 feet. Each mile we gained was a mile of terrain between us and the population gradient. At the 12-mile mark, we passed a small ranch property, a single-wide trailer with a horse corral and an equipment shed. A woman was standing in the yard next to a pickup truck, loading boxes. She saw us and flagged us down with both arms. I stopped. Lena looked at me. I rolled down the window. The woman was maybe 60, weathered, wearing Carhartts and a flannel. She came to my window fast, breathing hard. "Are you coming from Prescott?" "South of there." "Have you heard anything? My phone's been out for an hour. The landline's dead. I was supposed to get a feed delivery at 10 and nobody came." There's a health emergency in the Phoenix metro area, I said. Hospitals are locked down. What kind of? Infectious, neurological. The details aren't clear. I'd recommend you stay here, keep your gates closed, and don't let anyone onto the property you don't know. She stared at me. Then she looked past me, into the back seat, where Theo was drawing in a sketchbook and Margot was staring straight ahead with her jaw set. The woman's expression changed. She'd seen enough families and enough trucks in her life to know what evacuation looked like. "How bad?" she asked, quietly, so the kids wouldn't hear. "I don't know yet, but I'm not stopping until I find somewhere defensible." She stepped back from the window. "There's a Forest Service fire station at the end of this road. 8 miles. It's been decommissioned, but the structure's solid concrete block, metal roof, well with a hand pump. Keys probably still under the transformer box if they haven't changed their habits." "Thank you. You be careful with those kids." I pulled away. In the side mirror, I watched her walk to her gate and close it, and the practical economy of that gesture. No panic, no questions. Just a gate swinging shut was the most comforting thing I'd seen all day. The fire station was exactly where she'd said. A low, flat-roofed concrete block building with 2 bay doors, a communications tower with no dish, and a water tank on a steel frame behind it. The key was under the transformer box, rusted but functional. I opened the bay door and pulled the Suburban inside, and for the first time since 4:47 a.m., I felt something other than the cold arithmetic of probability. The station was stripped but intact. 2 bays, 1 office, a bunk room with 4 steel frame cots, a bathroom with no running water but a functional toilet connected to a septic line. The well behind the building had a manual pump that produced cold, clear water after 30 strokes of priming. There was a wood stove in the bunk room, a stack of seasoning pine rounds under an overhang outside, and 3 5-gallon jerry cans of diesel in a locked utility cabinet. Someone had maintained this place beyond its decommission. Someone who understood that remote infrastructure has value precisely when everything else fails. I parked the Suburban nose out in the bay, closed the door, and began inventory. Food, 4 days if we rationed. Water, unlimited from the well. Heat, the wood stove, and plenty of fuel. Defense, the 12-gauge, 24 shells, and the fire station's concrete walls. Communication, nothing. My phone had 0 bars inside the building and barely one on the ridge above the station. Lena organized the bunk room with military precision, making beds, setting up Theo's antihistamine schedule on her watch, creating a small field station on the office desk with the first aid kit, a flashlight, and a bottle of ibuprofen. She was in operational mode now. The veterinarian who managed emergencies, prolapsed uteruses, rattlesnake bites, colic episodes at 2 a.m. had taken over from the wife who'd called my therapist that morning. She didn't talk about the outbreak. She didn't ask me for updates. She built a livable space inside a concrete box, because that's what Lena does when the ground shifts. She builds floors. Theo claimed a cot by the window and arranged his Goosebumps books and gummy bears on the windowsill like a still life. He was adapting with the terrifying elasticity of childhood as long as his parents were present and his routine had anchors. The location was negotiable. He asked me if we could explore the fire tower. I told him tomorrow. He said okay with no suspicion, because tomorrow was still a currency he trusted. Margot sat on her cot with her knees drawn up and her back against the wall, and she was watching me. Not with hostility, not with the prosecutorial precision I'd become accustomed to. She was watching me the way you watch someone whose predictions are coming true in real time, recalculating everything you thought you knew about them. Dad. Yeah. That thing you wouldn't tell me, The part you left out? Yeah. It's bad. Yes, Margot. It's bad. How bad? I sat down on the cot across from her. Lena was in the bathroom, running the hand pump, testing the plumbing. Theo was on the floor drawing a picture of the fire station. I had maybe 90 seconds of privacy with my daughter. The people who get infected become violent, I said. They bite. The bites spread it. The hospitals are overwhelmed. The county health system used codes today that don't exist in any standard classification codes for patients who were clinically dead but still moving. She didn't flinch. She processed. I watched her run the information through her own internal architecture, the same architecture I'd given her. The pattern recognition. The refusal to dismiss data because of its implications. Zombies, she said. Not a question, a classification. I don't know what to call them, but functionally, yes. Something close to that. And you knew this morning. I suspected. The data was suggestive. Now it's confirmed. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry I said you were having a breakdown. That sentence hit me harder than anything in the last 12 hours. Harder than the data. Harder than Lena calling Dr. Keene. Harder than the county's impossible codes, because my daughter apologizing meant she understood, now, that the last 14 months of our relationship, the distance, the distrust, the quiet demotion of my authority in her internal hierarchy, had been built on a false premise. Not that I was reliable. I'd still been wrong before. But that being wrong once didn't mean being wrong always. And she had confused the two. Don't apologize, I said. You were being careful. Careful is what's going to keep you alive. At 3 p.m., 11 hours after we'd left the house, the emergency alert system activated on Lena's phone. She was standing by the office desk when the tone screamed through the concrete room, that 3-pulse blare that every American recognizes and nobody ever expects to hear in person. Theo dropped his crayon. Margot sat up straight. I crossed the room in 3 steps. The message was plain text on a red background. Civil emergency message, Maricopa County, and all adjacent jurisdictions. Shelter in place immediately. Do not approach individuals displaying erratic behavior. Do not attempt travel on Interstate 17 or Interstate 10. National Guard activation in progress. This is not a test. Lena looked at me. The phone was shaking in her hand. Not because her hands were unsteady, because the phone was still vibrating with a second alert, stacking on top of the first. Yavapai County Sheriff, all residents north of Prescott Valley Corridor road closures in effect on highways 89, 69, and 169. Remain in your residence. Armed patrols active. Do not interfere with emergency vehicles. Yavapai County. That was us. The outbreak had already reached the county we'd fled to. Not the specific mountains we were in, not yet, but the county infrastructure was responding, which meant the pressure wave was close enough to trigger institutional reaction. Theo was standing in the middle of the bunk room, with his crayon still in his hand, looking at his mother's face for instructions. He hadn't read the alert. He didn't need to. He could read Lena's expression, and Lena's expression was enough. Mom? His voice was small. Are we okay? Lena crouched down and held both his shoulders. We're safe here, baby. There are some sick people down in the valley, and the police are making sure everyone stays safe. That's all. Like when there was COVID and I couldn't go to school? Something like that. But we're in a really strong building, and Dad found us a good place. Theo looked at me. You did? I did, buddy. He nodded, reassured by the consensus. Then he went back to his drawing. The resilience of children is not innocence. It's a survival adaptation. They outsource threat assessment to their parents and conserve their energy for the things they can control. Theo controlled his drawings and his gummy bears and the radius of his curiosity. And inside that radius, the world was still functional. Margot was on her feet, reading the alerts over Lena's shoulder. "National Guard activation," she said. "That's real." "That's real." "How far away do you think it is? The infected people?" "Prescott is 90 minutes from Phoenix by highway. We're 12 miles past Prescott on a Forest Service road. If it's moving along population corridors, we have a buffer. But I don't know how wide the buffer is or how long it holds. What do we do if they come here?" I'd been thinking about this since we arrived. The fire station had advantages. Concrete walls, limited access points, good sight lines from the roof. But it was also a box. If enough bodies surrounded it, we'd be trapped. The defensive calculus was simple. The station was viable against a small number of threats, and enviable against a large one, with no way to predict which we'd face. If a few come, we stay. The walls hold. The bay doors are steel. If a lot come more than I can handle, we drive. The Suburbans in the bay, nose out, gassed up. We go north, deeper into the forest, and find higher ground. And if we can't drive, then we go on foot. There's a ridge trail behind the station that leads to a fire lookout at 7,000 feet. I saw it on the topo map on the office wall. It's 3 miles. Steep. But it puts us above any population movement. Margot nodded. She was cataloging exits. My daughter, who had been ready to Uber back to Phoenix 12 hours ago, was cataloging exits from a decommissioned fire station because the world had confirmed her father's math. At 4 p.m., I climbed onto the station roof using a maintenance ladder bolted to the rear wall. The roof was flat, tar and gravel, solid enough to stand on. From up there, I could see the road we'd driven in on a thin, pale line winding through dark green forest. I could see the ridge to the south where I'd gotten cell signal. I could see, far to the southeast, the faint brown haze of the Phoenix Basin, 70 miles away. And I could see smoke. 3 separate columns, widely spaced, rising from what I estimated was the Prescott Valley area. Not wildfire smoke too dark, too vertical, too localized. Structure fires. Buildings burning with no one coming to put them out. I sat on that roof, and I watched the smoke rise. And I tried to feel the vindication that should have come with being right. It wasn't there. There's no satisfaction in a correct forecast when the forecast is catastrophe. There's only the quieter, uglier feeling underneath. Relief that you acted on it, paired with the nauseating awareness that everyone who didn't is still down there. The first one came at dusk. I was on the roof. The sun was behind the western ridge, and the forest was moving from gold to gray in that 10-minute Arizona transition between day and dark. I was watching the road. I'd been watching the road for 2 hours, and the absolute stillness of it, no vehicles, no hikers, no sound except wind in the pines, had started to feel less like safety and more like the held breath before a cough. Then I saw movement at the bend, where the road curved around a granite outcrop. A figure, walking. The gait was wrong before I could see the face. Too stiff in the hips, too loose in the arms, like a marionette operated by someone who'd learned human locomotion from a manual, but never seen it performed. The figure moved forward in lurching, rhythmic steps, each one slightly off axis, correcting and overcorrecting in a way that made my stomach clench with something deeper than fear, an instinctive revulsion. The uncanny valley made flesh. It was a man, middle-aged, wearing khaki pants and a blue polo shirt, weekend clothes, the kind you'd wear to a hardware store on a Saturday morning. His left arm hung at an angle that suggested a dislocated shoulder. His head was tilted forward, chin near his chest, and he was making a sound I could hear from the rooftop, 50 yards away. Not a moan, not a growl, a rhythmic, wet clicking, like someone repeatedly unsticking their tongue from the roof of their mouth. He came down the road toward the fire station with the mechanical inevitability of water finding a drain. He wasn't tracking us. He wasn't hunting. He was following the path of least resistance, the road, the only clear corridor through the trees, and the station happened to be on it. I climbed down the ladder quietly and entered through the side door. Lena was in the bunk room with Theo, reading to him from Goosebumps with a vocal steadiness that I knew was costing her everything. Margot was in the office, sitting in the dark, looking through the window. "I see him," she whispered. "He's on the road." "I know." "Is he?" "Yes." She swallowed. In the dim light, I could see her hands gripping the windowsill. "He looks like Mr. Gunderson." "Who?" "My geometry teacher." "He doesn't, it's not him. But he looks like him. The polo shirt. He looks like someone's geometry teacher." That observation broke something in me that the data never could, because she was right. He looked like someone's geometry teacher, someone's husband, someone's father walking to his car on a Saturday morning with a list of errands and a half-finished coffee. And now, he was lurching down a forest road with a dislocated shoulder and a wet click in his throat. And whatever had been inside him, the man who graded papers and told bad jokes and drove his kids to practice, was gone. The body remained. The tenant had been evicted. He reached the station's gravel apron. I watched through the office window as he walked directly into the bay door. Not a charge, not an attack. He simply walked forward until the steel stopped him. And then he stood there, pressing against it with his chest, his feet still making walking motions on the gravel, going nowhere. The clicking sound was louder now, and underneath it, I could hear his shoes scraping on the ground in a rhythm that had nothing to do with intention and everything to do with a motor system running a corrupted program. Theo's voice came from the bunk room. "What's that sound?" "Animal," Lena said instantly. "Probably a deer rubbing its antlers on the building. Deer do that?" "In May. Sometimes." God bless veterinarians and their inventory of plausible animal behaviors. The man stood against the bay door for 47 minutes. I timed it. 47 minutes of pressing and scraping and clicking. And then, as if some internal compass had shifted, he peeled off the door and continued up the road, north, into the forest, following the path of least resistance toward nothing. I watched him disappear around the next bend, a silhouette against the last gray light, walking toward the end of the road where there was nothing but wilderness and elevation and the total indifference of the mountains. Margot was beside me at the window. Neither of us spoke until he was gone. "That's going to happen again," she said. "Probably. More than one. Probably." She turned to me. In the near dark, her face was older than 15. "Teach me how to use the shotgun." I taught her on the roof the next morning, Sunday, while the forest was still fogged in, and the visibility was 30 feet. I showed her the safety, the brake action, the loading sequence, the stock placement against her shoulder. I let her fire one shell into the hillside so she'd know the recoil. The sound cracked through the valley and sent a pair of ravens spiraling upward like black paper caught in a thermal. Theo inside asked Lena if that was thunder. "Heat lightning," Lena said. "In May, in a fog." Theo accepted it because he was 9 and because the alternative was unacceptable. 3 more came on Sunday. 2 together, mid-morning. a woman in hospital scrubs, and a teenager in basketball shorts, walking side by side in that same dislocated gait, not communicating, not coordinating, simply following the same road gradient. They passed the station without stopping. The third came at sunset, alone, moving faster than the others, almost a jog, its arms swinging in wide arcs that served no biomechanical purpose. It stopped at the gravel apron, turned its head toward the building, and stood motionless for 12 minutes. I was on the roof with the shotgun across my knees, barely breathing. Then it turned north and jogged on. None of them tried the doors. None of them vocalized beyond the clicking. None of them showed any evidence of coordinated behavior, strategic thought, or recognition of the station as a structure containing people. They were following terrain. The road was easier than the forest, so they walked the road. We were furniture. Monday morning, Lena pulled me into the office and closed the door. "Theo needs to know," she said. "He's 9. He's 9 and he's not stupid. He knows the sounds aren't deer. He knows the thunder isn't thunder. He asked me last night if the sick people look scary. And I didn't know what to say because I've been lying to him for 2 days and the lies are getting harder to maintain." She was right. The architecture of protection we'd built around Theo was developing structural cracks that he could see. And each lie we patched them with was teaching him that his parents' words didn't map to reality. The thing we were trying to prevent his fear was being replaced by something worse, his distrust. What do we tell him? The truth, simplified. There are very sick people. The sickness makes them not themselves. We stay away from them. The building is safe. No details he can't carry. No images he'll see when he closes his eyes. Okay? We told him together, sitting on his cot, with Margot across the room listening. Theo took it with the same elastic processing he applied to everything. He asked 3 questions. Can the sick people open doors? We told him no, based on what we'd observed. Do they know we're here? We told him we didn't think so. Can they get better? We told him we didn't know, which was the truest thing we'd said in days. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "I'm glad you made us leave, Dad." 5 words. 5 words that paid a debt I didn't know I was carrying. 5 words that dissolved the residue of 14 months of silent accusation, the Palo Verde failure, the Holiday Inn in Flagstaff, the therapist's office, the SSRI, the promise I'd broken. My son, who trusted by default, had just told me that my default was worth trusting. I went to the roof so nobody would see my face. On Tuesday, the road brought something different. I heard the engine before I saw the vehicle, a diesel rattle, unmistakable, coming from the south. I was on the roof with the shotgun. I stood up and watched a white pickup truck come around the bend, moving fast, trailing dust. It skidded onto the gravel apron, and the driver's door opened before the truck had fully stopped. It was the ranch woman, the one who'd told us about the fire station. She was carrying a lever-action rifle, and there was blood on her flannel shirt, not hers, based on the distribution. Spray pattern, someone else's. "They came through my property last night," she called up to me. 8 of them. Came through the horse corral. I lost both horses before I got to the rifle. She was breathing hard, but her voice was controlled. I put down 6. 2 went north. I followed the road. "Are you bitten?" "No. The blood's from the horses." I climbed down and opened the bay door. She drove the pickup inside, and I closed the door behind her. In the bunk room, Lena was already clearing a cot. Theo looked at the woman with wide eyes. Margot looked at the rifle with wider ones. "I'm Ruth," the woman said. Aaron, my wife Lena, Margot, and Theo. Ruth sat on the cot Lena offered and drank a full liter of water without stopping. Then she told us what she'd seen. Her property was 7 miles south of us, closer to Prescott. On Sunday night, she'd heard sounds on the road, the clicking, and stayed inside. By Monday, they were moving through the forest, not just the road. Off-trail, through underbrush. They were slow in dense terrain, but persistent. And they didn't stop for obstacles. They pushed through branches, walked into ravines, and climbed out. Moved with a directionless momentum that had no purpose she could identify. They don't hunt, she said. They wander. But the wandering takes them everywhere eventually. It's like watching water fill a basin. They'll fill every low point and then start rising. The water analogy was the one I'd been using in my own head. Ruth had arrived at it independently, from observation rather than modeling. She was a rancher. She understood how things moved across landscapes, cattle, water, fire. The infected moved like none of those things individually, but like all of them collectively. They were a slow, undirected flood. How many did you see on the road coming here? I asked. 11. 4 on the road, 7 in the trees on either side, more than yesterday. The density is increasing. Every day. By the end of the week, this road won't be passable. The calculus changed in that moment. The fire station had been viable as a short-term shelter against sparse, directionless wanderers. It was not viable against a rising tide. Ruth's basin metaphor was precise. The low elevations would fill first, and the infected would push uphill as the lower terrain saturated. We were at 6,000 feet. The ridgeline behind us was at 7,000. The math bought us days, not weeks. The fire lookout, I said. 3 miles up the ridge trail. Have you been there? 20 years ago. It's a 14 by 14 cab on a 60-foot steel tower with a catwalk. 1 staircase, 1 entrance. You could hold it with a baseball bat. Can we get the vehicles up there? No. Trail's too narrow after the first mile. You'd have to hike everything in. I looked at Lena. She was already doing the logistics: weight, distance, trips, what we'd carry and what we'd leave. Margot was listening. Theo was drawing a picture of Ruth's truck. We move tomorrow at dawn, I said. 1 day to stage supplies at the base of the trail. 1 trip up with everything we can carry. We leave the vehicles here. Ruth nodded. I've got 200 rounds of .357 and enough jerky to last 3 weeks, plus whatever's in the back of my truck. Why did you come here? Lena asked. Not suspicious. Genuine. You had your own property, your own supplies. Ruth looked at her. I had a property. I didn't have people. Property doesn't mean anything if you're the only one in it. She glanced at Theo, who had looked up from his drawing. I came here because I heard a shotgun blast yesterday morning, and I knew whoever fired it had someone to protect. That's who I wanted to be near. Margot's practice shot. The 1 round I'd let her fire into the hillside to learn the recoil. That shot had carried through the valley and told a woman 7 miles away that someone in these mountains was alive and armed and guarding something worth guarding. My daughter's first shot had saved a stranger's life by pulling her toward us before the flood rose too high. We staged all day Wednesday, loaded packs, sorted supplies, made hard decisions about weight and necessity. The cast iron cookware stayed. The camp stove went. 2 sleeping bags per pack. We'd double up. All the ammunition, all the water purification tablets, the first aid kit, Theo's antihistamine. The food divided across 5 packs so that losing one didn't mean losing everything. I made one last trip to the ridge for signal. My phone found a single bar for 11 seconds, long enough to load a partial page from a Phoenix news site. The headline was 3 words in red banner text: "Phoenix has fallen." Below it, a satellite image showed the city at night. The pattern of light was wrong. Too many fires. Too few grid-powered lights. The urban structure was decomposing, its electrical nervous system failing node by node. I didn't show anyone the image. Some information is a tool. Some is just weight. Thursday at dawn, we locked the fire station, shouldered our packs, and walked into the pines. Ruth led, rifle across her chest, reading the trail with the automatic fluency of someone who'd walked these mountains for decades. Then Lena, then Theo. His pack was lightest, just his books and his gummy bears and a sleeping bag. But he carried it with a gravity that made him look older than 9. Then Margot, shotgun slung across her back, walking with a steadiness I hadn't seen in her before. Not confidence, something harder, resolution. I walked last, rear guard. I carried the heaviest pack tools, diesel, the bulk of the ammunition, and I watched the trail behind us for movement. The forest was quiet in the way forests are quiet when the animals have already made their decisions about what's coming. No bird song, no squirrel chatter, just wind in the canopy and 5 sets of boots on granite. A mile in, Theo stopped and turned around. "Dad?" "Right here, buddy. If we have to stay on the mountain a long time, can I bring more books next time? We'll figure something out. Margot could read to me. She does good voices." I looked at Margot. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders shift in a way that meant she'd heard. And the shift was not refusal. It was consent to a version of herself she hadn't planned on becoming, the older sister who reads to her brother in a fire lookout while the world below reorganizes itself around a new set of rules. The trail steepened. The pines thinned. The air thinned. We climbed out of the basin and into the ridgeline, where the granite broke through the soil in pale, angular shelves. And the view opened up behind us, miles of green forest, rolling south toward a brown haze that was no longer just Phoenix. The haze had spread. It covered the southern horizon like a bruise, and within it, I could count 7 smoke columns, where there had been 3 on Saturday. At the 3-mile mark, the fire lookout appeared above the tree line. A steel tower, 60 feet of cross-hatched metal supporting a small glass and wood cabin with a catwalk ringing its perimeter. 1 staircase, 1 entrance, visible in every direction for miles, which meant we could see what was coming long before it arrived. Ruth was right. You could hold it with a baseball bat. We climbed the stairs single file. The cab was small, 14 by 14, with windows on all 4 sides, a central wood stove, a built-in desk, and a firefinder map table bolted to the floor. It smelled like dust and pine resin and old smoke. The windows were intact. The door locked from inside. The catwalk was solid. Lena set down her pack and looked at me across the small room. Theo was already at the window, looking out at the view with the unfiltered wonder of a child who has been delivered to the top of the world and finds it acceptable. Margot stood in the doorway, looking back down the stairs we'd climbed, the long steel staircase descending 60 feet to the ground, the only way up and then the only way down. "We're here," Lena said. "We're here. Because you woke me up at 5 in the morning." "Yes." She crossed the small room and put her arms around me, and it was the first time she'd touched me since Saturday morning. And I realized that the distance between us for the last 4 days hadn't been distrust. It had been the specific paralysis of a woman processing the fact that the person she'd pathologized was the person who'd saved her, and she didn't know yet how to hold both truths in the same body. The husband who'd been wrong about Palo Verde and right about this. The man she'd called a therapist about at 5 a.m., who was now the reason her children were alive at 7,000 feet instead of dead in Glendale. She held me, and I held her. And neither of us spoke, because the words for what we'd survived in the last 5 days hadn't been invented yet. And the words for what was coming hadn't either. Ruth found a pair of binoculars in the lookout storage cabinet. And each evening, we took turns on the catwalk, watching the valley below. The infected moved through the forest in loose, undirected streams, never clustered, never coordinated, but constant. From 7,000 feet, they looked small, manageable, like a problem viewed from sufficient altitude. Theo started a journal. He wrote in it each night before bed, recording the weather, what he ate, what animals he saw. He asked Margot to read to him, and she did not goosebumps because he'd finished both copies, but the Fire Lookouts log from 1987, which she read in dramatic voices that made him laugh. She was becoming someone I hadn't met yet, someone the crisis was forging from raw material I'd only ever seen as defiance. Lena treated a cut on Ruth's hand from a sharp edge on the catwalk railing. She irrigated it, closed it with butterfly strips, and wrapped it in gauze. Then she sat on the lookout floor and said it quietly, "I owe you an apology." "You don't." "I called your therapist, Aaron. I told my daughter you were having a breakdown while you were saving us. You were working with the information you had." "I had the same information you did. I just didn't want to believe it." I thought about that, about the difference between not seeing the data and not believing it, about how the second one is the quieter failure because it wears the face of reason. Some nights, before I sleep, I stand on the catwalk and look south toward where Phoenix used to glow. The horizon is dark now. No light pollution, no amber haze, just stars, more than I've ever seen, filling the space where 4 million lives used to generate enough electricity to blot out the sky. I was right. I carry that knowledge not like a trophy, but like a scar proof that something happened, evidence that the wound was real. My family is alive because of a spreadsheet and a broken promise. My daughter speaks to me again. My son writes in his journal every night. My wife sleeps beside me in a 14 by 14 glass room at the top of a steel tower. And some mornings, she reaches for me before she's fully awake, which is a language older than data and more reliable than any model I've ever built. I was the man who cried wolf. The wolf came. And the only thing that saved us was that I cried loud enough, early enough, to get 4 people into a car before the teeth arrived.